Hello, friends. The first thing I have to do is excuse myself for the kind of voice that I have at the moment. I have recovered, well, I haven't recovered. I am recovering from a condition of laryngitis caused by excessive coughing, caused by the flu. Anyway, I could wait until, maybe days and days until I have the proper voice with which to record these programs. But this is the first day on which I feel well enough to proceed. And I'm hoping that the sound of the voice is not too off-putting, with, of course, the occasional coughing, as we try to go forward, having finished our work of synthesis on petal number 6. Of course, one never finishes, and there are so many loose ends which will only be tied together, brought together, properly correlated when we are able to see this process for ourselves and to examine many different egoic lotuses in different stages of unfoldment, and even in different stages of unfoldment for the same individual. You can imagine what an extraordinary learning experience that would be. And the time will come when it is possible, undertaking the science of the soul and being able to read the records where it is appropriate, that we will see clearly how this unfoldment correlates with the different stages of evolution demonstrated in the Incarnation. So, where do we find ourselves? We have completed commentary number 46, program 46, which was for petal 6, part 5. We divided petal 6 into various numbers of parts. That was simply necessary given the way they had to be recorded. And we decided either to move on to petal 7 or to take a look at some material from the treatise on cosmic fire which might be useful in preparing to look at petal 7. And these pages here are part of a commentary I did in 2008, part of a commentary, and basically from page 825 to 831. And we are going to be moving before long into the petals which are specifically related to the Hall of Wisdom, and not so much to what is called the period covering his participation intelligently in world affairs. That has more to do with the general period of opening of the second tier of petals. But when we're really dealing with the spiritual kingdom, which entry into which occurs at the first initiation, we have definite activity of an organizational and vitalizing kind, a coordinating kind, an awakening kind occurring in the will petals, the petals of sacrifice. So we have now covered work that has gone on within the Hall of Ignorance. We've covered work that has gone on in the Hall of Learning, most associated with the second tier of petals. And now we're going to be dealing more with the Hall of Wisdom. No, in a way, of course, we already have begun doing that because one has entered the Hall of Wisdom when the fifth petal has been completely unfolded, and the first initiation is taken. The spiritual kingdom has been entered. And we've discussed the sixth petal and even the full unfoldment of the sixth petal, and certainly by the time that occurs, a man is working consciously in the eighth petal and has taken the second initiation. So we've already begun our discussion of work within the Hall of Wisdom. But perhaps some of these ideas offered from a treatise on cosmic fire will be of interest and importance. Not all. I haven't done the entire section here, which would be a number of pages longer. So we begin here on page 825 of Cosmic Fire. And let's just see, I think the way to do this would be to, right, okay. And, as usual, it's important that this be done, and let's see if that works. So in these three circles of petals lies concealed another clue to the mystery of the 777 incarnations. Now, of course, that's not the number of incarnations that we actually undergo. Really, we undergo thousands of incarnations as far as I can understand. But this is a symbolic way of looking at the categories of incarnations, and also perhaps linking these incarnations taking on the planet Earth to a number associated with the Earth itself. So as we look at the number 777, we must remember that it is used to symbolize our Earth. Planets can be symbolized by gatherings of numbers. And we must remember just that there are other numbers symbolizing other planets. You can imagine what 555, 666, and 888 can be thought of as symbolizing. And although DK doesn't say that it is so, he pretty well says that 666 is related to Mars. We can understand that 555 would be related to Venus and 888 to Mercury. Here is a quotation. It has been stated that the mystery lies hid in the 777 incarnations. This figure provides room for much speculation. We can only imagine the depth of speculation of which such a thinker as Master DK is capable. It should be pointed out that this does not hold the number of a stated cycle of incarnations through which a man must pass, but holds the key to three major cycles previously mentioned. Primarily, this number applies to the planetary logos of our scheme and not so much to other schemes, although one wonders if he says not so much, if it does somewhat apply. Each heavenly man has his number, and the number of our heavenly man lies hid in the above three figures, just as 666 and 888 hold the mystery of two other heavenly men. This is taken from an earlier section in the book, and of course I've added 555, and I would speculate that 222 connects to Jupiter, and maybe 333 to Saturn, and 111 possibly to Vulcan, possibly. It depends on whether we're talking about the soul ray or the monadic ray. 999, well, that is a question of completion. I'm not exactly sure, but of course it has a connection. So these figures do not convey an exact number of years, but are figurative and symbolical. This is what DK is saying. So we have to try to understand the symbolism This must be evident, I say here, when the figure 777 is applied to the number of incarnations of the average human being. DK tells us that we have had thousands of incarnations. So they are intended to convey the thought of 3 cycles of varying duration. So let us try to see what these 3 cycles may be and how they relate to the Egoic Lotus. The 3 figures contained in this figure are 700, 70, and 7. Each succeeding cycle is 10 times shorter than the preceding, though this multiple 2, I think, must be taken as symbolic. Is the period of the probationary path, which the 7 represents, 100 times shorter than the period of the the period of passage through the hall of ignorance and the earliest incarnations? Well, those can take millions of years. It can take, there's so many people that have been traveling already now for 21 million years, and they still don't have the outer tier petals completely unfolded. So if we divided 21 million by, let's see, I have a way to do this. Yeah, 21,000,000, divided by 100, really just knock off the last 2 zeros. Can we honestly say that the path of probation takes 210,000 years? I would say that's a very long figure. So what I'm suspecting is that even though comparing these figures shows us that each one is approximately 10 times shorter than the one preceding it, that figure 2 must be looked at in a symbolic and not a literal manner. So they are intended to convey the thought of 3 cycles of varying duration based upon the septenary nature of the manifesting monad. Well, the monad has 7 basic principles of varying types according to the perspective through which it manifests. And there are also 7 types of monads. Man is usually conceived of as having 7 principles, and each of these principles is derived from the monad. The monad is in a way 7-fold, reflecting in the 7-fold jewel in the lotus. From another perspective, I believe the monad is 12-fold. Each of these principles is derived from the monad and is in fact a fundamental faculty of the monad, expressing most characteristically on a particular dimension of the cosmic physical plane. I mean, the mind is the fundamental principle of the monad, faculty of the monad, and it's going to be expressing on the 5th subplane of the cosmic physical plane, and sentiency on the 6th subplane, and activity of an outer kind on the 7th subplane, and so it goes with the Buddhic nature and the Atmic nature expressing respectively on the 4th and the 3rd subplane. And there are other ways, of course, of dividing the principles. That's a very interesting section in the treatise on cosmic fire. It might be, it's so important. I think a number of groups in the world have these cosmic fire study groups. Now they're being carried on the internet, very important, but I know a number of groups that are meeting in this way, and it's such a great book to patiently chew on, as it were. There's no way without the initiate consciousness that we're going to understand it, the book, nor is there any way, even with the preliminary initiate consciousness, that we're going to understand all of the book, because some of it is obviously written for initiates still higher than the third degree, and maybe even higher than the fourth degree. If the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are read with care by the third and fourth book of those sutras, read with care by masters of the wisdom, we can imagine that DK has presented from the great archive of the ageless wisdom that which higher initiates can benefit from as they read. Okay, so within the septenary nature are found personality, soul, and spirit, although we could question, the essence of spirit is basically will. I should not say that. The essence of spirit is being, and its first expression is the first aspect, or will. So let us question here, maybe spirit should not be included here. As I cough, so sorry. As the essence of spirit is pure being, which is no principle. Ultimately, of course, it is the boundless, immutable principle, but it's no principle of man. So, although there is not an exact correspondence, 700 can be seen to reflect personality development, 70, soul development, as experienced in the relational etheric body, and 7, spirit expression, as that expression works through the will to sacrifice, which begins in earnest on the path of probation. We begin to test ourselves as to our willingness to give up lesser attractions in favor of greater attractions. Now, I don't think we can really look at this as a personality, soul, spirit exact correspondence, because there are so many ways in which personality development extends into the second series of petals, and thus relates to the 70 incarnations as well. In other words, the 70 incarnations, which have to do with what DK calls his participation intelligently in world affairs, is not entirely of the soul. But the soul does begin to be influential, and certainly we might say with even more accuracy, okay, how about that? We might say that the number 7 relates most to the period in which the soul is influential, as it becomes on the path of probation. So, from another perspective, the 777 incarnations end after the conclusion of the path of probation. In other words, the correspondence of 7 with spirit is very loose. Of the number 7 with spirit is very loose and general. Really, more what happens here is that the 777 incarnations bring us to the conclusion of the probationary path. And, when is that, really? From one perspective, until you're an accepted disciple, some way between first and second initiation, a rather long period, you're still on the path of probation. That's one way we can consider the path of probation ending. The initiate is already a probationary initiate of the first degree. But from another perspective, the path of probation might be considered to end at the first degree. In any case, what I'm trying to say is that the path of probation can take us into developments which occur of a vitalizing and or organizing and vitalizing nature in the 7th and 8th petal. Work on the path of probation can be conceived of as occurring when one is working on the 7th and 8th petal if the path of probation is considered to continue until a man is an accepted disciple. Let's just say that work within the 7th petal anyway can be considered to continue, because when there is work being done in the 7th petal, strenuous and abnormal efforts, the man will achieve the first degree. But the first degree doesn't mean that he's not being tested, that he's not being probed, that he's off the path of probation. No, he's, from a certain perspective, he's still on the path of probation. And in this entire stage, we also have the idea of the accepting disciple, and then the pledged disciple. It seems to me that the pledged discipleship continues not just until the first degree. We might begin to make a pledge before the first degree, but it certainly continues until the accepted discipleship stage. And even then, DK refers to those who are pledged and accepted. So a pledge does not terminate there at accepted discipleship. So what I'm trying to bring out is to think of the path of probation as starting before the first initiation, and perhaps in a way ending there, but from another perspective, continuing until the stage of accepted discipleship, and even then not really ending, because one must become the pledged initiate disciple. It continues. Our pledges, our promises, are factors in our continuing approach to the higher initiations. Let's look here now. Okay, so in black we see DK's words, and the commentary is in blue, and then now if I add or subtract, add to or subtract from what I wrote earlier, then I'll put it in red here. So the first 700 incarnations concern the unfoldment of the outer circle. This is the longest period. We can imagine how long, excuse me. There are people now who were individualized 21 million years ago and still have not completely unfolded the outer circle. Everything now, will proceed much more rapidly, and maybe I've kind of developed the idea that 25 million years is a good symbolic or archetypal figure for the duration required for the unfoldment, complete development of man until the fourth initiation. The number 25 is much associated with the fourth ray, at least Stephen Pugh, who is a ray theorist and esoteric astrologer, has brought forward this correlation of the number 25 with the fourth ray. And the fourth ray, of course, is the ray of the human kingdom. So maybe this period of 25 million years, of course many can do it much more rapidly, and maybe some more slowly, might be a good generic figure for the duration of what makes for the development of the human being from the time of individualization to the time of completion or release from the human kingdom, again at the fourth initiation. That number 4 keeps coming up. So these concern the unfoldment of the outer circle, and this is the longest period. And as I've said, it seems to be millions of years long. And despite variation in soul cycles, in other words, the incarnational durations of cycles of those who are on different rays, it's going to leave plenty of room for many, many lives. The initial vibration is slow and heavy. Remember the sons of heavy rhythm? So sometimes we can see these in the monadic types, right? So if we went to page 1081 in Cosmic Fire, the units of inertia, this is the first developmental phase that we reach. It doesn't mean that the monads are inert. It just means that their expression as a human being is subject to this factor of inertia, and this is very much the case with regard to the first petal. And he says millennia of lives have to elapse. Well, I think that's an underestimation, really. And I say that it does not necessarily mean thousands of lives, but it could, or many thousands of, many cycles, many 1,000-year cycles, maybe, many 1,000-year cycles. But we can also speak of millions of years for the unfoldment of the outer circle. We just get an idea of how very slow in terms of time as we normally consider it is the unfoldment of man during the hall of ignorance. He's stumbling around, once he begins to see more clearly and use the mind, then the whole process can begin to take on speed. What the personality spends many thousands of lives in establishing is not going to be lightly altered when the ego, working in the lower consciousness, seeks to effect change. This is from Letters on Occult Meditation, page 82. I gathered it because it was a relevant passage. And there we definitely have DK telling us that many thousands of lives, many, how many is many? 10, 15, 20? It's not just 1 or 2, right? It's not just 1 or 2 or 3,000. Many thousands. And so the ego begins working at a certain point, and even, and that's generally at the 5th petal, the ego takes a more conscious approach to the development of the lower man. But even then, at that time, before the ego or solar angel begins to work with the lower man, many thousands of lives have passed. One day it will be fascinating to see the so-called motion picture of our many lives. And maybe imagine some will be pretty boring, and pretty repetitive. And we will learn so much from being able to see, as the Buddha saw, the accumulation of his experiences as a human being. I think he was achieving the sixth initiation under the Bodhi tree, and one wonders whether that type of vision is conferred at that initiation. Anyway, I break these paragraphs up and interleave my comments. The initial vibration is slow and heavy, and millennia of lives have to elapse before the what I'm doing is amplifying here. DK says millennia of lives, and I'm talking about many thousands of lives. So millennia of lives is a peculiar statement, but it certainly means thousands. It's a plural, millennia. Before the interchange of energy between the ego and its reflection, the personal self, the lower threefold man, is such that the consciousness may occultly awakens in the hall of learning. So, excuse me, even though we may now be seeking exit from the hall of learning into the hall of wisdom, it takes thousands of lives to enter even the hall of learning. Some kind of perspective has to come to us, some great sense of patience. What it has taken to make us as we are, imperfect as we are, is still a very long time, as time is being counted in relation to the experiences of Earth. So we have an important statement here about what transpires in the hall of learning. There is an intensified exchange of energy between the ego and its reflection, the personal self. I think we can, especially once the once work in the fifth petal really begins. And the consciousness of man occultly awakens in the hall of learning. Occultly awakens. Well, in other words, let's just say he realizes that he is two instead of one. Later he will realize he's one instead of two, but at this point he realizes he has a higher and lower self. The pairs of opposites become noticeable. So it's clear that the interplay between the psychological pairs of opposites becomes very strong in the hall of learning. The soul or higher self becomes a noticeable factor in consciousness, however it may be named at that time. And it's, of course, depending on your school of thought, it's not always called the soul or ego or higher self or egoic lotus, any of those, some of them technical terms. It may simply be called a higher power or God within or something other, or the daemon, such as Socrates had. It's an awakening to the idea that there is a higher part of ourselves, and maybe an awakening to the idea that this higher part of ourselves is sponsored by a still higher being called a solar angel, a being of an entirely higher order that is infusing this higher aspect of ourselves. So occult awakening means to awaken to the inner subjective factor, and it just takes thousands of lives, millennia of lives, to accomplish this. Sometimes we get impatient, with how the advancement in our present life is going, but it's just the blink of an eye compared to what we have been through in these times of ignorance. We need a great breath, in a way, just to stand back and to understand this steadfast, though very slow, march of nature in our development. Now, this is interesting here. For advanced man at this time, these incarnations took place upon the moon chain, and in some cases, certain planets connected with the inner round. We have discussed the possibility of etheric planets and planets involved in different planetary chains, or involved with different planetary schemes that form a unit that are not part of the normal 7 chains in a planetary scheme. Excuse me. Advanced man at this time, at least the majority of such human beings, has a very different history than those who individualized on the moon chain. Now, it's also true that some Earth chain humanity has achieved entry into the hierarchy. I suppose very rare, but they have developed quickly and have not required 25 million years to do so. The Christ is one, and there are others, he has told us. So when we think about, maybe I'll deal with this, but when we think about this great number of incarnations, it suggests that on the moon chain, or maybe even in a previous solar system, a very lengthy cycle in order to pass through such incarnations. If they take millions of years here for Earth humanity, then how long do they take in relation to a chain like the moon chain, or a solar system like the previous one, which is related to the third aspect of divinity? The third aspect process always takes longer. So DK seems to be telling us here that for advanced man, the incarnations which correspond to the number 700 may have taken place on the moon chain, and this could mean even thousands of moon chain incarnations. What that chain was all about, and that dense physical body we call the moon, what that meant for us in terms of our home, has all been forgotten. One day, of course, it can be retrieved and relived. But how interesting that the Buddha, let's say, under the Bodhi tree, looking at his earlier lives, since he was moon chain humanity, would have to see those lives as if they were taking place on the moon chain. And maybe even some of them in the previous solar system, because the seeds of the previous solar system ripened and came to fruition in the Buddha, which may suggest that he was actually a human being, a nomad coming from the previous solar system. I can't say that with absolute certainty, but there are references which really seem to support that idea. So just as the Christ represents this solar system and this chain, the Buddha certainly represents the previous chain, the moon chain, and maybe the previous solar system. So we have quite a unusual past, many of us. I think if you are a disciple, a serious disciple, working at service and at illumination and studying the esoteric wisdom, you can consider yourself an advanced human being. I think even those who are lesser human beings than those who are disciples can consider themselves advanced man. And so they have a very unsuspected past. We might think of all of our incarnations as if they occurred here, on this planet, but it would not be correct. And maybe the circumstances, I mean, once these things become visible to us, maybe the circumstances under which they did occur will look most strange. As for incarnations on certain planets, quote, connected with the inner round, there's probably little that we can say about this. Mercury, however, a planet closely related to the moon, in one respect, through the third ray. There's a very strong third ray connected with both, is also related to the inner round. So Mercury has a close energetic relation to the previous solar system. That is true, just as Venus to this one, which itself is related to the moon chain. So Mercury related to the previous solar system, and the previous solar system holding a kind of analogical relation to this solar system as the moon chain holds to our earth chain. So we could follow that line of thought. There's not too much detail given about the inner round. Great possibilities are offered as long as one can refrain from succumbing to certain non-specified temptations. I suppose, the problem is always, are we willing to serve, or do we want to have such rapid progress that we will be standing within the radiance, blinded by the light, and pass on our way towards the great center of absorption without really following the bodhisattva impulse. So maybe there are incarnations in relation to Mercury. And there are a number of planets that have this inner round, and I think Earth may also be one of them. As I say, not much is given here, and if it were given, you could question of what immediate relevance would it be to improving our discipleship service. But there are some things that are nice to know. However, it is clear that a number of planets are connected with what DK calls the inner round. Considering how many incarnations presently advanced man may have taken on the moon chain, and where he now stands in his evolution, we can see that progress has been very slow, and basically we are understanding, because of the moon chain failure, the figure 25 million years for human evolution is too small, because in a third ray system things take more time anyway, we've been told, just as the stars which are associated with the third aspect, they tend to last a longer time than those associated with the second, and then those associated with the first aspect are shortest in duration altogether. So moonchain humanity, even though some of them will not even be on the path until the next round, may have already spent considerably longer than 25 million years in their human evolution. It's at points like, and when it comes to humanity from the previous solar system, well, solar systems last trillions of years. which draws our attention to what pralaya may be, because we do spend a lot of time in these, in the condition of pralaya, which is not merely a state of suspended inactivity, just a holding pattern. Things are accomplished in those pralaic states, just the way the mini pralaya that we call death offers the opportunity for things to be accomplished in the subtler worlds, such as devachan, that condition on the lower mental plane, fourth sublevel of the lower mental plane, which is really the opportunity to work desire and aspiration into faculty for the next incarnation. So anyway, just get the idea of the slowness of evolution. And those of us who think, okay, well, we are more or less advanced human beings, we are disciples in the making, we're moving fast, apparently, but just think about how that moon chain failure may have slowed everything down, and how very, very long we may have been at this business of human evolution, whereas Earth chain humanity has not had that kind of duration in its development, even though its development has been long, 21 million years in many cases. There are different times for incarnation, of course, you know. In middle Lemuria, maybe in later Lemuria, in Atlantis, all the way up to the time of the closing of the door on the animal kingdom. So fresh egos were being generated for a long period, for millions of years. And the time when these egos were generated, you know, the bud lotuses, as it were, those times may determine the degree of advancement of these egos relative to each other, and also whether or not the solar angel, a solar angel, attached itself to the human being, or merely stimulated the human being so that an egoic lotus could be formed. Okay, so we can see that the advanced people of the present period may have quite distinct origins, and this may account for different types among them. Origin in the previous solar system, origin on the moon chain, and maybe at different periods upon the moon chain as well. What that system actually offered in terms of opportunity, we cannot know that with any degree of clarity or exactitude. Excuse me. So this is the circumstance which necessitated his coming in for advanced man at this time. These incarnations took place upon the moon chain, and in some cases upon certain planets connected with the inner rounds. Okay. And so who are we talking about here? When we talk about his, we mean advanced man's coming in during the Atlantean root race. So he jumped over the Lemurian root race altogether and did not go through those tremendous struggles, because his first petal, which we call the Lemurian petal, was certainly unfolded, and he had Atlantean work to do on the second petal, no doubt, but he was already a formed egoic lotus. So this is the circumstance. So I ask you, which is the circumstance which necessitated the coming in of advanced man in the Atlantean root race? Was it his occult awakening, which made the entry into the earth chain incarnation at the time of the Atlantean root race propitious. The implication is that bodies of the Lemurian type were too crude to offer advancement beyond the kind of consciousness that these relatively advanced egos already possessed, had already achieved. The analog to Lemurian and even Atlantean development, perhaps even Atlantean development, seems to have occurred in those many incarnations they experienced upon the moon chain, probably a chain in which intelligence was emphasized. So, circumstance. Well, maybe the circumstance is simply the fact that the analog to the 700 incarnations occurred on the moon chain. And because of that circumstance, continued development had to occur, and the next phase of development was offered, in a sense, by the second of the conscious root races, the fourth root race, the Atlantean root race. So let's just say the necessary opportunity was offered in the second phase of Earth chain development. Second phase of, well, let's call it humanity's Earth chain development. Okay. So many of this type refused to incarnate earlier as the bodies were too coarse. Okay. So it is an interesting statement, as such men seem to have been at least somewhat self-determining in relation to their incarnational process, or maybe when in their egoic consciousness they refused. This would be a higher perspective than that which was possible to the personality. So when thinking of man during early evolution, one imagines that he, as a human consciousness, does not have much say about the nature, quality, and placement of his forthcoming incarnation. This would seem to be left somewhat to the guidance of the solar angel. But perhaps moonchain men of this type were sufficiently advanced and self-conscious to be part of the planning of the incarnations they were to take on the Earth chain. Well, I would say, it cannot have been the solar angel that was attached to them yet. The attachment of the solar angel to them would have to have come later on the point of incarnation. We know there were no solar angels as part of the incarnational individualization process occurring on the moon chain. It occurred in a different way as animal man aspired and his higher spirit nature responded. But we do know that all of us, for whom DK is writing, he's certainly writing Treatise on White Magic for advanced human beings at this time, that all of us have a solar angel. DK assumes it. So at some point, a group of solar angels must have affixed themselves or permeated or penetrated already individualized man of the moon chain, and then began to oversee his continued evolution on the Earth chain and on our globe. So if they refused, the refusal was probably made upon the plane of soul, and from a vantage point which was far greater than the limited consciousness they probably possessed when immersed within the physical plane incarnation. So we could say that that soul man was making this decision. Interesting about refusals, because there are the refusals that a man can make, and there are refusals that the solar angel can make in terms of attaching itself to a developing human personality. And I suspect there are refusals a monad can also make, because in a way the entire individualization process begins with the monadic impulse. Nature, we understand, is economical and does not arrange for situations which are wasteful of energy and unnecessarily repetitious. Late nature is much ruled by the law of economy. So that is a law of correct appropriation of energy for that which must be achieved according to the divine plan. So the whole question of how and by what conscious agencies human incarnations are arranged is very problematic and probably subject to change as the human being evolves. I think there probably is a point at which the awakening human being, the awakening soul in incarnation, participates with the underlying solar angelic consciousness in the choice of the incarnation. And what do we learn here? This was the cyclic reflection on the lowest plane. We're talking about presumably the dense physical plane, of the refusal of the monads, maybe certain monads, to incarnate at the dawn of manvantaric opportunity. Well, I think certain vehicles had to be evolved. Sometimes we look at the word refusal and we interpret it in very human terms, but I think if monads are refusing, they must have a vast perspective upon what is required. So we have to be cautious here. Was it the monads who refused to incarnate, or was it the solar angels? Was it both? I'm opting for the idea that there are various kinds of refusals possible. Certainly there are discussions in the secret doctrine about the refusals of certain groups of solar angels to associate themselves with the animal man of that period. I think, during the second round, was it not that the solar angels looked in upon the development of what was to become man, and they saw that there was no possibility, that no vehicles existed into which they could possibly infuse themselves. So there's definitely a solar angelic refusal to associate with certain animal men, and even much, much earlier. Matter of fact, there's quite a story there that nature unaided tried to create man and instead created monstrosities, at which the laws or the solar angels were horrified, and through their horror and through the realization that these monstrous forms did not correlate with the divine plan and purpose which they, the solar angels, represented, they proceeded to assist in the destruction of those monstrous forms. So, but this refusal of the solar angels could have been identical with the refusal of the monads to do the same. As when the solar angel allies itself with the human monad, the monad must also be involved, taking its place as a living fire right at the very center of the egoic vehicle which the solar angel builds. So when we think about individualization, is a dual process involving both the monad and the solar angel, and triple in the respect that it must involve a representative of the animal kingdom. as the vehicle. So we're told that Shambhala has an exquisite sense of timing, and this must be true for monads who in essence are members of Shambhala. So we should not look at this from a moralistic perspective. So this refusal must not be looked at from a traditionally moralistic perspective. It is something higher and greater and more intelligent than that. Okay. We've been talking here about the dawn of manvantaric opportunity. I suppose the question is, when is that really? A manvantara can be an entire round, and what is the cycle which is being referred to? Well, we do know that there's quite a difference between the development of moon chain monads and earth chain monads. Was it to be the case that more of the available monads were to have individualized on the moon chain, perhaps? That would have made it possible for more of them to move together. Was it possible that all of humanity was to be moving more together rather than in the diverse and varied groups, varied in terms of their development, which are now moving forward? Well, of the monadic choice here, DK tells us that no real sin was committed. It was their privilege, the privilege of these monads, to discriminate. And this refusal has its bearing upon conditions upon earth, being the basis of the great class distinctions, which in every land have been so fruitful of trouble, and the esoteric foundation of the caste system, now so abused now in India. I wonder if the adherents to the caste system understand its deeper esoteric origins. Well, there seems to be a kind of hint that there was a holding back of the monads, and that they, of certain monads, and that they chose perhaps to individualize on the earth chain rather than on the moon chain. Now, could this be in a way one reason why the solar angels were called in a compensatory manner to speed the development of those monads who had refused, who had held back? It's so interesting, the number 4, the fourth subplane of the mental plane, is connected with discrimination and also with the human kingdom, and perhaps with the entry into the human kingdom. So all of these cycles have a very profound effect upon the distribution of developed and undeveloped monads, at least in terms of their expression as human beings. And we seem to be somewhat confining ourselves to the moon chain and the earth chain. Whether monads have a human opportunity earlier than that, well, I'm not sure that they do. I know they have an opportunity to invest themselves in the immetalization, in vegetalization, in zoonation process, whereby they enter the lower kingdoms. Perhaps it is, though, that in the moon chain came the first opportunity for monads to actually become human. Well, this is something we cannot know, whether their refusal to enter was correct. It does seem as if some refused to enter in the moon chain, and as a result would be more developed now had they done so. And we certainly know that the solar angelic entry has helped make up for the disaster on the moon chain. We wonder whether if more human monads had entered, it would have been possible perhaps to avert some of that disaster. Was the balance of monads, human monads, sufficient in that chain? Well, these are things that will have to be clarified as we go and as more is known. So I say here that much of interest is being communicated. We have read of the sin of those who refuse to incarnate, and also of the apparently resultant sin of the mindless. This is kind of a holding back, perhaps, that occurred even with respect to entry into our particular chain and globe. There may have been a holding back with respect to monads having an opportunity to enter into the human kingdom on the moon chain, but also there were different phases of individualization which occurred on our earth chain, and maybe some refusal was here involved. We've been told that the sin of the mindless had resulted from, at least in part, from this refusal. So could monads have incarnated in the second round or third? Well, I've been asking that question. There are references in the secret doctrine that suggest the solar angels looked in upon planetary process in order to see when their right moment might occur. Because the coming in of the solar angels is far more than simply the creation of the human kingdom. It has to do with the development of a planetary logos and the opening of the heart center of the planetary logos. It's kind of an initiatory process. So they looked in, as I said before, in the second round, and saw what kind of vehicles they might have to animate or infuse or pervade. Excuse me. And they found those vehicles very wanting, because they had been created unintelligently. All knowledge on the atmic plane is not really all knowledge. It is with respect to the cosmic physical plane. Well, we can't even say that. I'd say with respect to that which a human being as a human being can attain. And that is, it is to be remembered that the master is still a human being. So that particular quality of all knowledge, that capacity, relates to the master's prerogative. Well, let's put it like this. Maybe if the earth chain monads had incarnated earlier, the vehicles which were deemed too crude for the incoming moon chain monads would not have been quite so crude. And Lemurian incarnations could have been advantageous to them. Well, it's a possibility. These are deeply hidden matters, and as I say, we are not really understanding the great science of cycles at our particular degree of unfoldment, but even understanding that one day we can understand the science of cycles already indicates a place where our knowledge can be enhanced. In any case, we have tremendous class distinctions at the moment, and we have huge degrees of difference in the development of egoic lotuses. We have, obviously, people on the planet who have one petal open, or almost open, let us say, and we have others who have all 9 petals open, and others who have graduated beyond the 9 and no longer even have a causal body. Well, they have all 12 petals open, and then the causal body is destroyed, and all of them are still human beings. So we wonder if the huge stretch which separates different types of men from each other would be a little less huge if there had been a taking advantage at the dawn of Mahamanvantaric opportunity, whatever that specifically means. Not Mahamanvantaric, but Manvantaric. Excuse me. Manvantara usually refers to a round. There are many kinds of Manvantaras. Even the term Mahamanvantara may not relate entirely to the duration of an entire solar system, but so often it does. As it now stands, the moon chain monads are far in advance of most of those who experienced their first incarnation on the moon chain. And the great gulf existing between capital and labor, let's see, those who think and those who carry out the thought, we might say, is the result of the unequal development in human form, at least expression in human form, of these monads. One group of which incarnated as a human being on the moon chain, and the other not until the earth chain, and certainly, billions of years separated these two opportunities. Well, with these coughing attacks, I maybe shouldn't have ventured into this, but anyway, I'll try to continue as I can. So, had the moon chain monads incarnated even earlier, i.e. in Morya, and despite the crudity of the available vehicles, chances are they would be even more developed in human terms than they are now. What the monad is on its own plane is not open for us to understand. The development of the monad on its own plane is different from the development of the monad as it expresses itself in human terms. What we're really talking about is its ability to express in the lower 3 worlds, and we call that development, but it may have a very definite kind of higher development on its own level. But perhaps they would be, there was probably a refusal there, and if there had not been a refusal of those developed moon chain monads, relatively developed, then the gap, well, let's say chances are that they would be even more developed than they are now, and maybe the gap between them and the earth chain monads would be even greater. But all of this is given to a kind of divine discrimination, which is exercised from a perspective greater than we can know or understand. It does show us, however, the degree to which free will is entering here, and in this case, at the monadic level. So we can see that occult timing is a matter of profound importance when determining whether harmony and right relations will be facilitated or inhibited. Okay, we move on. Well, if human beings are too far apart in their understanding, they will have such different desires and therefore different values that it may be difficult to harmonize them. Let's look at the present day so-called clash of civilizations. And in general, we are finding sub-diaphragmatic values in contrast with super-diaphragmatic values. Now, obviously not in every case, but the two civilizations seem to be oriented towards different objectives. One group rather materialistic, I think even in its spirituality, except for certain mystical groups associated with it, which have a refined spirituality. And the other group, well, maybe materialistic in its own way, but tending towards the higher perspectives of the higher chakras as the major orienting forces of consciousness. So we do have a very wide spread of human development. Should it have been less wide? Would there be more understanding, or is it required somehow that there be a great spread in order for the pyramid of the human hierarchy in incarnation to be supported with a broad base and a narrowing upper area to the pyramid until we simply reach a point? Well, these are, again, thoughts that come, and they will have to be worked out when we know more. I think it is useful as we go through this kind of material to understand what we don't know and why it would be useful to know it. The problem of labor and capital has its roots in the subjective distinction. It's an inner distinction having to do with the higher mental plane between equipped and unequipped egos. Now, how would these egos have been more equipped? Well, had they started sooner, according to their choice, they would have been more equipped. Now, this is really a monadic choice in a way. The choices of the solar angels maybe had more to do with deciding in relation to our particular round and globe when they would enter. But it would seem to me that if the monads concerned had to make a choice and did make a choice, the solar angels working with the monads would have been obliged to enter as well, as these two force centers, the human monad and the solar angelic monad, do work together. So time is needed in order to equip an ego for reasonably full expression within the lower three worlds. If entry into incarnation is delayed, there is insufficient time for equipping. And even if we just look at our own round and globe, we have monads entering into individualization at different times. Now, is this cyclically determined according to law, or is it their own free will to hold back until opportunity presents itself again? The monads that we're holding back with respect to our own globe and round may already have been individualized. Some of them were. And they held back for more adequate forms. There were other monads who were not yet individualized, and yet they came in at different times. Well, all of this is going to work itself out in the degree of development we see in human beings, and this development will be reflected in the degree of unfoldment of the Egoic Lotus. We have talked about the monads in relation to the Egoic Lotus on page 1081, and also about the origin of different types of monads and their likely degree of development, going on to page 1082 of Cosmic Fire. Maybe 1083, but right in there, from 1081 to 1083. So, of course, on the moon chain, we understand there was a delay and a failure. And so the moon chain monads were less developmentally equipped than they would have been had not their progress of evolution been interrupted by the, quote, timely interference of the solar logos in the affairs of our planetary logos and the expression of the planetary logos through one of his chakras, the moon chain. We understand that, let's just say, these moon chain egos, or monads, were entering, well, I would say with at least one petal open, or opening, and they would still be at a very low level of development had not, I believe, solar angels associated themselves with these entering monad egos and facilitated their progress. So we have a story here of equipped and unequipped egos. People who are studying these matters can be considered to be relatively advanced human beings, and even beyond the normal advanced man, disciples and those who are approaching initiation. So most of them, most of us, probably have some kind of moon chain origin. Although whether we came from the moon chain or from the previous solar system, because sometimes I think it's not possible to come from both, or at least it's unlikely, that will have to be sorted out when we know more about the history of our own soul expression. So we have equipped and unequipped, and the contrast between those units of the human family on earth who have passed out of the hall of ignorance, and those who are as yet groping in its dark and gloomy corridors. Well, if we're involved here with this kind of work, we have certainly registered the reality of the higher of the pairs of opposites. So technically we have passed out of the hall of ignorance, and we are making application to the hall of wisdom. Most times when people go to the grocery store and say, "Is there anything I can get you?" I always say, "Well, I'd like a little wisdom, please." And that's oftentimes what I order at a restaurant as well. "I'll have some wisdom, thank you." I get some very strange looks. But I do, mean it. Anyway, this distinction between human units is not separative. It is simply factual, and one can note the distinction while still remaining in consciousness, very connected to all those who are apparently distinct. So the implication here is that many of those who incarnated for the first time on the earth chain are still working in the hall of ignorance, that is, within those symbolic 700 incarnations in the outer tier of the Egoic Lotus, whereas those who incarnated on the moon chain have, by and large, moved into the hall of learning. This does seem to be the case, although when we look at the lotuses of passion and desire, 2/5 and 3/5, 2/5 came from the moon chain, and they still don't have that third petal completely open. So from a certain perspective, even moon chain monads moon chain monads excuse me, even moon chain monads may still, may I emphasize that, still be working in the hall of ignorance. There is a significant distinction between modern intelligent humanity working with the love petals, participating intelligently in world affairs, as it were, of the Egoic Lotus, and those who are still absorbed in the requirements of organizing and unfolding the knowledge petals. There's just a great difference in experience and in the number of cycles experienced and what has been gained from those cycles. Another distinction, of course, involves those who are in process of unfolding the sacrifice petals. They are fewer and are distinct from those working in either the knowledge tier or the love tier. Let us hope that as we study these kinds of matters, we realize the importance of the first soul law, the law of sacrifice, which is really, in a way, the law of rapid evolution. The greater the sacrifice, the more rapid the evolution. One can understand then that the Christ, who is the most rapidly evolving human being of the earth chain variety, must have given tremendous sacrifice along the way. Otherwise, he could not stand where he is. So we're talking about distinctions here between those who have passed out of the hall of ignorance and those who are as yet groping in its dark and gloomy corridors, unillumined by the higher self or by a conscious knowledge of the higher self, between those egos who are only bud egos and those who have organized the outer circle of petals and whose petals are ready to open up. Well, you know, there are different ways of looking at this. I think we have established that we do not need to organize the outer tier fully, that is, to be working in petal number 3 before, or to have finished working in petal number 3 before there is unfoldment of petal number 1. It doesn't, at least to me, it doesn't seem to make sense, especially when the lotuses of passion and desire have for their objective work in petal number 3. And the only thing a human being can do in terms of human work is to work at organizing and vitalizing. So it doesn't seem, as I have maybe belabored excessively, correct that there must be complete organization of the outer group of petals before the first of those outer petals is unfolding. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't make sense to me. But, you know, I may be missing something here. So anyway, between those egos who are bud egos and those who have organized the outer group of petals. Now, DK tells us, in fact, that at this time there are no more bud egos, strictly speaking, and that all have at least one petal open. Now, let's just say, to what degree? Because when you say that an ego has a petal open, there are different possibilities about the degree of opening. So do we really mean fully open? The lotuses of Brahman, well, let's just see here. I think it's about page, let's just say 843. Whoop. That's not going to do. 843. The lotuses of Brahman, Brahmic lotuses, in which the first knowledge petal is fully unfolded, is every human unit minimally at this time a lotus of Brahman? That is a question. Or are there some who are almost so, but not fully so? They are so-called because they represent on the physical plane the fully active, intelligent unity The man of small mental development, the lowest types of workers, agriculturalists, and peasants on every continent, they are also called third-class creators, etc. So we do see that they unfold at different times, these petals, and that it doesn't seem to make sense that work of organizing and vitalizing is going to be done in the sacrifice petal of the outer tier before any kind of unfoldment will occur in the very first petal. So, to me, it makes most sense to think that the most primitive egos at present have at least the first petal in process of opening. So maybe they would not yet be full lotuses of Brahman. So this might apply to some members of the Aboriginal groups, but certain of their members must necessarily be in process of working on the second petal, because such are their artistic abilities and community orientations, and we learn that the possibility of expression, some soul expression along a creative or artistic line, will appear in relation to this second petal. So we don't have any more, strictly speaking, bud egos, but maybe we have some that have gone beyond the bud stage and are not quite at the point where the first petal is completely unfolded. DK spoke of certain people who are strongly atavistic and are a natural burden upon humanity, and it could be that these are those who are still in the process of opening the first petal. Here I have the quotation: "The souls who live, but whose consciousness sleeps." They have, etheric and physical vitality, but let's just say that sentiency and mental understanding is not present. These are the dormant human beings. There's a word that reflects sleep, whose intelligence is of such a low order, and their awareness of themselves and of life is so dim and nebulous that only the lowest form of human existence comes into this category. It doesn't quite sound like lotuses of Brahman, does it? It doesn't sound like, we are fully there. They do exist, of course. We are not fully at the lotuses of, let's see, I'll put it, lotuses of Brahman stage, because the lotuses of Brahman have more capacity than these people. Racially, nationally, and tribally, they do not exist as pure types. Excuse me. But occasionally, such a person emerges in the slums of our great cities. They are like a throwback and never appear among what are called the natural savages or the peasantry. So they are, among human beings, the least developed. You kind of wonder, are they the very most recent to have individualized? So are these people the most recent to have individualized on our earth chain? Maybe. Because after all, time is the great discriminator here, the amount of time we've had to evolve. Yet the fact remains, he says, that all egos today have at least one petal open. And this is very important. Whether open means completely open, we do not know, because the lotuses of Brahman have the first or knowledge petal completely unfolded. So we have to assume that there are some who are not yet fully lotuses of Brahman. And when we go to page, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll see if I can open one more of these without running into trouble. If we go to Esoteric Psychology, let's say page 203, we have the colorless lotuses and lotuses of closed and sealed condition. So neither one of them are going to be lotuses of Brahman, which have one petal completely open. But they could be those who are on their way to becoming lotuses of Brahman. And then wherein the flower is on the point of opening, you kind of wonder, are these also not yet lotuses of Brahman, because nothing is really opened? Or do we talk about the flower as the three petals themselves, at which point we would be dealing with a more advanced type in which the entire flower, the outer three petals, were on the point of opening? Anyway, so going back here to make sure, between those egos who are only bud egos and those who have organized the outer circle of petals and whose petals are ready to open up. This is the big discrimination, and something that seems contradictory to me. Can primitive types really work in the third petal? Excuse me. It seems it seems to me, at least, seems to me that working one petal ahead of that which is unfolding is more likely. Now, I've dealt with this quite a bit. I don't know if there is a way that we can actually resolve this. And you know my thinking here, that if the lotuses of passion and desire, who already have two petals open, and are working on the third, and have a lot of development, are working on that third, and all that work can be is organizing or vitalizing, then how can a far more primitive type also be working on the third? So this remains a little bit still of a mystery to me, but it will be solved, I believe, when we can really see these things and make a comparative study. It is clear that the stages of organization and vitalization or awakening technically precede the stages of ready to open up or opening up. The last distinction that DK makes between bud egos and those whose outer circle of petals are ready to open up, it seems very wide. If there were any bud egos, they would certainly be relatively unequipped. But are there those who have opened the first tier of petals? Are those who have opened this first tier of petals to be considered equipped or unequipped? I think by and large, relatively equipped. The truly equipped ego, who for instance is a member of the class known as capital, very intelligent, moonshade humanity, might very well have petals in the second tier open. They are often dynamic personalities and professional people. Some of the most selfish people, yet accomplished in their own way, could have the fifth petal, well, quite open, or at least well organized, in part, making them egos with the lowercase, lower e, to be reckoned with. In other words, dominant personalities. DK says the idea of a septonate of centuries must be carefully pondered upon. I assume he means by this 7 100-year periods. Let's see. As ever in all occult matters, the idea of triplicity must be also borne in mind, with a synthesizing period which is a summation of the triple coordination. I guess we have this with the human being, you know. We have 3 halls. Well, we have 3 tiers of petals, let's put it like that. And then we have the synthesis petals, which gather everything together from the process of the 3 tiers. So we have the 3 and the 1. When this type of sequence is applied to the Egoic Lotus as a whole, each of the tiers will represent a 30-year period, of course, not literally, with the final unit of 3 synthesis petals plus the jewel representing the 10-year period, which we discuss here below. Of course, in reality, there's a lot of difference between the three periods. We cannot take the relative proportion literally. So we have, according to DK here, 3 periods of 3 tens, 90 years. I suppose with each of the petals representing, each petal representing 10, and the tier representing 30. And 1 synthesizing period. Obviously, the whole factor of synthesis is much shorter. When you think that the 3rd and 4th initiation can be taken in the same life, you know, there's the full opening of the Egoic Lotus, all 9 petals, and then this incredibly fast synthesis period, even in the same life, leading to the destruction of the causal body. So none of these figures can be taken literally. They have to be seen relatively. This 7 times repeated. So this is what makes the 700-year period. The 700-year period applies symbolically to the unfoldment of the knowledge petals, and there is a synthesizing period at the end of the development of every tier. We have to ask if within the period of unfoldment of the knowledge petals, 7 periods are to be found, each period with its synthesizing period. Well, we could apply the 30 plus 30 plus 30 plus 10 model to the unfoldment of the 3 knowledge petals, with a kind of synthesizing period bringing them all together into a new and completely unified relationship. DK talks about this special event which occurs after all of the petals are unfolded in a tier, and then how they develop a new relationship with each other. There must be some kind of very interesting energy dynamics, because the idea that we have 7 repetitions of the 100-year cycle, and we can get the 100-year cycle by looking at each one of the petals, 10 10 10 for the first petal, 10 10 10 for the second, 10 10 10 for the third, and then a 10-year period, making 100. Is there some kind of energy flow repeated 7 times? Of course, we think of the 7 spirille, but by the time there is the unfoldment of the first tier petals, we're not dealing with 7 spirille at all. We're simply dealing with 4 spirille, at least in the hall of ignorance. Later, the 5th spirilla of the physical permanent atom comes into effect when we are working with the first and second initiations. He goes into detail on this, also the fifth spirilla of the astral permanent atom, but this is an earlier time we're talking about now. So each cycle, again, these are figurative cycles. They are meant to promote the sense of analogy and relative duration. Each cycle leaves one of the petals more vitalized and has a definite effect on each. So each cycle, what? Of, should we say, of 7? Is that what we're talking about? Now, I'm going to make this a little, that's it. Because vitalization does not occur all at once. So, but it seems to me that there will be greater vitalization of the earlier petals in the tier, because the earlier petal is the first to unfold. So it has to be most vitalized in these cycles. And later, the second petal and the third petal in the tier becomes sufficiently vitalized to unfold. Okay, so each cycle leaves one of the petals more vitalized and has a definite effect on each of the petals. So here it seems that DK is speaking of the 30 plus 30 plus 30 plus 10 model. It would be a mistake, I feel, to think of each petal as taking approximately the same amount of time to unfold. I don't think that is the case at all. The earlier petals, each one of them, takes longer than the following petal. And that goes all the way through the 9 and maybe through all the 12. The earliest of the 3 knowledge petals must, it seems, take far longer than the third petal to unfold. It's a progressive cycle of unfoldment with the more material petals, each petal being more material than the one following it, taking longer to unfold than the next successive, less material petal. So there must be a general mathematical model for the unfoldment of these petals. None of this is going to occur without divine mathematics, I believe. But as always, the free will of the human being can make a big difference and account for large deviation from the norm. And also, there must be a model for each type of human being. Each type, monadic type, I mean. I just begin to sense the mathematics behind all this, the general model for different monadic types, and then the human differences in the application of will and the following of desire. Also, we see the periods of increasing vitalization precede unfoldment. That's so important. Awakes vitality and unfolds. This is how DK describes it at one point in the vital references. If we look at the total number of periods involved in the unfoldment of the knowledge petals, we will have 4 times 7 equals 28, considering 3 periods of 30 years and 1 period of 10 years multiplied by 7. Now these numbers 4 and 7 are very important because they actually relate to personality cycles. Elsewhere we are told. So 3 periods plus 10 is 4, and then 7 times over. If we further subdivide, we find 3 groups of 3 tens, plus a final period, all this multiplied by 7, and thus in all 70 shorter periods rather than 28 mostly larger ones. Well, I don't pretend to have a handle on the mathematics here, but these are the suggested considerations, and none of these numbers will really be insignificant. I'm remembering that soul cycles relate to 3s and 7s, and personality cycles to 7s and 4s. So as for 3 groups of 310s, there are 3 colors to be associated with each of the knowledge petals, and thus subdividing into 10s makes sense. Perhaps the unfoldment of each color, that is, of each 10, takes place somewhat sequentially. A deep science is hereby indicated, maybe nothing more than indicated, and we get to understand just a little of this virtually unfathomable, at our present stage, science of consciousness, and the formal accompaniments of this science of consciousness, and the cyclic accompaniments of this science of consciousness. The beautiful order of it all begins to be appreciated. The key to cyclic unfoldment and the Hall of Ignorance are contained in these numbers, so we may infer, but the key is not yet completely or convincingly in our possession. Far from it, just the hints, just the indications. The fact that we can break this down into 4, into 4s, and then multiply by 7, and the fact that 7s and 4s are related to personality cycles is really of interest. I think it is the Christ telling one of his disciples that every hair on their head is numbered. There's a great mathematical cyclic science behind the events which we notice, and even behind the inner subjective events which we will come to notice and which are here being described by the Tibetan. And it will be, I think, most amazing to see the way the deity of our planet is using number and time to bring about an orderly unfoldment of form and consciousness. Well, I suppose that all of this raises more questions than it answers, because certainly we simply have indications here. There are some important things that emerge for us, and each student will pick out what for himself is most important. To me, it stands out here that increasing vitalization precedes unfoldment. As DK says of petal number 7, that it awakes vitality and unfolds. So without sufficient vitalization, there will be no unfoldment. Now, the second period in this 777 is the period of 70 incarnations, symbolically considered. And these concern the unfoldment of the middle circle, but perhaps not the complete unfoldment of the middle circle. I think not the complete unfoldment of the middle circle, because the complete unfoldment of the middle circle would take us beyond the probationary path. And it is the 7 incarnations which relate to the probationary path. The principle of overlap has constantly to be considered. We do know that the rod of initiation is applied to the 7th, 8th, and 9th petal, But we do know as well that until the fifth petal is completely unfolded, there is no initiation. And so the application of the rod to the seventh petal, which is technically setting the seal of initiation, the first initiation upon the individual, must correspond to the complete unfoldment of the fifth petal. So we're working with several petals at the same time. Well, I think there will come a time when we can observe this petal unfoldment in any individual clairvoyantly, and then actually be in a position to see what the next developments subjectively must be. I think we'll be able to be most specific about this. When Master DK is advising his students about what they must accomplish, I'm sure he can consult the development of their etheric body and the chakra system there, which is a reflection of the development of their egoic lotus. And if he can see in the egoic lotus what next has to be achieved, the spiritual esoteric psychologist who is the initiate will be able to give the best advice and the best guidance. So anyway, these 70 incarnations, these concern the unfoldment of the middle circle, but as I say, probably not the complete unfoldment, because the complete unfoldment, in my view at least, excuse me, takes us to the second initiation. I'm remembering some classes I've had to give when I was sick. I recorded them, and the never-ending coughing is there. Well, I'm doing the best I can with this, and in most of the programs I make, my voice is there. Here I'm just forging ahead, as Aries types tend to do, and not regarding the condition of the form, especially, because Saturn, the Lord of Form, one of the Lords of Form, falls in Aries. Well, anyway, what I'm saying here is this is generally the case regarding the unfoldment of the middle circle. Our task will be to confirm whether the period of 7 symbolic incarnations occurs during the opening of the later middle circle, or applies directly to the final sacrificial circle, as is generally stated. And of course, I think I'm already showing my, well, you know, in a way it's both. Because we are told at one point that on the probationary path, the 7th and 8th petal, the first two in the will circle, are organized, and that one awakes vitality and unfolds. And that's on the probationary path. So there will be some work on the probationary path in petal number 7, obviously, because unless you work in that petal first and achieve through abnormal and, well, let's just say excessive effort, abnormal efforts anyway, strenuous and abnormal efforts, you will not be in a position to prepare the petal for the application of the rod of initiation. So we have to, in a way, become initiate before we are initiated, and this we do on our own, and some degree of unfoldment of that 7th petal is occurring on our own, and that has to be on the probationary path. And yet, while that's being done, the complete unfoldment of the 5th petal has not even occurred, and certainly not the 6th. We are not to presume, I say here, that the opening of the middle circle occurs 10 times more rapidly than the opening of the outer circle. The period may be even more rapid, as I've suggested earlier. The figures given are therefore symbolic, relative, indicative, but not to be taken literally. They are instructive, but not literal mathematical measurements. Much can be learned, DK goes on, from a consideration of the occult significance involved in the sending out of their followers by any initiate, such as the Christ, in groups of 70, going 2 and 2. So, groups of 70 going 2 and 2, so maybe the number 35 is involved, and maybe 140. The number 35 is implicated here. 70 also indicates the proverbial 70, which is said to be the duration of the man's life. The 70, well, polarity is involved here. Let's put it like that. And in that second tier of petals, the polarity of the pairs of opposites is an important feature. 35 is also, okay, let's see here, is also the symbolic year when, how about spelling it? When the soul makes its first major impact. I mean, it depends on how advanced the individual is, but archetypally it's the year 35 that sees the soul come into prominence. All the personality development is well on its way, and the soul can now make its impression. 35 is the number of the atomic planes, 7 times 5, or 7 subplanes times 5 systemic planes. The polarities are represented by the duad, the 2 and 2, and of course he says 70 groups of 70. Yeah, I suppose 35 groups of 2. 35 groups within the group of 70, each group being a 2. The positive and negative, that is, the receptive, are thus represented, and perhaps the polarities of man and deva, again positive, and that's the human, and negative or receptive. Number 70 is to be associated with the second aspect of divinity, and so is the second tier of petals and the second division of the number 777, which is 70. And 35, of course, the soul impact. 35 may be a number connected with the fifth ray, which is related to the fifth kingdom, which the soul represents. There is, we realize, a close connection between the numbers 7 and 2, most clearly represented in the nature of Jupiter, which has those 2 prominent. And if you look at the table of creative hierarchies, you will see that the 7th plane is also the monadic plane, or the second plane, 2 and 7. Those who go forth 2 and 2 are to preach the word, and the word represents the divine aspect. I think there are some religious groups right now that send their proselyters out in groups of 2, and I'm not sure whether there are 35 groups of 2. Maybe. They are to teach, and thus represent the second ray. In the numbers 35, the divine will is represented, for this number reaches all the way to the top of the atomic plane, through which the divine will manifests. So we have some really interesting numbers here, and we are relating them to the second ray, which is related also to the second tier, which is the tier that man, in which man primarily wrestles with the polarities of higher self and lower self. By the time we get into the petals of sacrifice, the balance is definitely being tipped towards the higher self, although the victory is not really there until the third initiation. But certainly those kinds of struggles with the polarities that we find while man is working in the fifth petal have been transcended or mostly worked through by the time we have the first initiation. That doesn't mean they are all resolved, because there is, right before the third initiation, what we are told to be a fearful conflict, and all the issues of the dweller on the threshold excuse me, have yet to be worked out in completeness. So these 70 incarnations primarily affect, I think this is so important, the development of love in the personal life. And again, what I'd like to do is copy that and then put it over here, his participation in worldly affairs, and I want to put it in here. Okay. All right, I'm going to have to copy this. Yeah. And here we go. And the development of love in the personal life. And I suppose, I'm not sure what page this represents, but, well, whatever page. TCF. Trying to get together excuse me, these references which relate to the second group of petals. So participation intelligently in world affairs and development of love in the personal life, even though some of that has already manifested. They are soul responsive petals, and love is of the nature of the soul. It does tell us something about the effect of spirit in the third set of petals. Okay. Now, oh, there we go. I always need my brackets. So these 70 incarnations, not literal, remember, not a literal, it could be thousands here. Not literally, 70, at least, many hundreds, primarily affect the development of love in the personal life. So this is such an important summary statement regarding that which is to be achieved in the 70 incarnations. And also, also intelligent participation in world affairs. So we must remember that the love petals are called, let's see, what are they called? Love, or deal with, I think. Deal with love in relation to the astral plane. So when we use the term personal, The idea of astrality must never be far from our consideration. That which is personal involves the solar plexus center and the astral plane. And if we're thinking about that second tier of petals, the solar plexus is strongly involved because at least for some of those petals, perhaps there is a movement to the heart center. The development of love in the personal life, the evolution of the astral nature, okay? These petals are a source of high energy, and the flow of this energy into the personality brings about the evolution of the personality. We must never forget that the petals themselves are like energy centers, and that they do affect personality unfoldment based on the recognition of the pairs of opposites and their equilibrizing in love and service. And this is going to happen as we move towards the sixth petal, as we get into the sixth petal, as we get into the organization of the sixth petal. So we are given here how the astral nature evolves, and also an indication of that which is accomplished through the evolution of the love petals. Let's look at this again. These 70 incarnations primarily affect the development of love in the personality life. It already exists to a degree, but it's in the Hall of Ignorance that love is more form-based. And here it becomes more and more affected by the love of the soul. Primarily affect the development of love in the personality life, the evolution of the astral nature, and we might say as a reflector of love, and based on the recognition of the pairs of opposites, higher self, lower self, and their equilibrizing, Libra, in love and service. It's a very clear function, a description of function of these central petals. Matter of fact, it's so good that I think I would like to put it in the special references. We can say, okay, here we go. And they're equilibrizing. Okay, and they're no, maybe the word equilibrizing is spelled differently. Equilibrizing, okay, in love and service. Let's see if I can make this one appear. Okay. No, not quite, and I'm not sure why. Well, anyway, I managed to get this into these vital references. These 70 incarnations primarily affect the development of love in the personal life, the evolution of the astral nature based on the recognition of the pairs of opposites. What is higher values? What is a higher value? What is lower? What are higher desires and lower? And they're equilibrizing in love and service. Important. Okay. So, going back to where we were, this gives us a very good description of what goes on in these love petals and during, well, for the most part, the 70 incarnations. So we're given how the astral nature evolves and also an indication of that which is accomplished through the evolution of the love petals. In the middle tier, the pairs of opposites on the astral plane are recognized, including the recognition of the greater pairs of opposites, soul and personality, and the effect that these greater pairs of opposites have upon the astral plane. What does it mean? What does it take to equilibrize the pairs of opposites? Love and service, we are told. So we have to have a respect for form and also a respect for the higher self, which is using the form. We can see that the ability to integrate soul and personality is at least somewhat achieved during the processes of the second tier. Well, in order to achieve the first initiation, which is achieved with the unfoldment of the fifth petal completely, there will definitely be integration preceding this. Even the selfish personality integration precedes this kind of integration of soul and personality, which is partially accomplished at the first degree. So an active harmonization must occur, and each of the pairs of opposites, we might say under Libra, must be given its due. During the process of initiation, the greater of the pairs of opposites dominates, and the lower of the pair is gradually sacrificed, and this is the work of the sacrifice petals. And I want to gradually sacrifice. And yes, we do note the importance of the sign Libra throughout the second petal processes. Libra is intimately connected with the second ray. It actually is. If we check out some of the paths of higher evolution, the ways of higher evolution, and also if we check out page 332 and 333 of Esoteric Astrology, we will see divine love and understanding connected with Libra. And it's also inferentially connected with the fourth ray, harmonization and love. It certainly represents the kind of love of others which is the object of the individual to cultivate during the organization, vitalization, and unfoldment of the second tier. So this cycle covers the period passed by man in the hall of learning. And back here, I think we should put down here that this is the hall of learning. Oh, hall of learning experience. And what are we learning about? Well, you know, we're learning that there is a soul, that we are that soul, we have a higher self, and that we must bring the factor of soul into our expression. That's what we are learning about. Okay. So often the work done during the entire second tier is associated with the hall of learning, but we must determine whether the hall of wisdom is entered before work is done upon the third and final tier within the 9, or at least, I think I'd like to make this a little bigger, perhaps. Yeah. Or at least, yeah, entered before the work is done upon, or at least during the second part of the work in the second tier. Because we have the idea that the hall of wisdom can be entered even before the first initiation is complete, and so work done in part of petal 5 and in petal 6 will take us into the Hall of Wisdom, it already tells us that there is some work being done with the unfoldment of petal 5 and 6, some work being done in the sacrifice tier. Anyway, in this Hall of Learning, it has the correspondence, at least, to the Atlantean root race, and there must have been some strong sense of the transcendent and divine in that root race. So by the time an individual is working within the 6th petal and unfolding the 5th and 6th, he is certainly more than an Atlantean, yet the correspondence is there. I mean, he is an Aryan, definitely. Even those who are really unfolding the 3rd petal are, to an extent, part of the early Aryan experience, that mental focus, which can be called the early Aryan experience. So it's the correspondence in the Atlantean root race and its conflict between the Lords of the Dark Face and the Brotherhood of Light, and this happens within each individual. And the 2nd tier of petals is a real battleground. You kind of wonder, let's just say that those who have to make a choice between emphasizing the personality and emphasizing the soul, whether they do not have their major battle here in this 2nd tier of petals. Maybe those who must make the choice between the emphasis upon the personality and the emphasis upon the soul have a major battle in the 2nd tier of petals, and petal 5 may be the scene of such a conflict. We're told about the lives and lives of conflict as a man tries to turn his attention to the real. Okay, now the middle petal within the 2nd tier represents experiences which are the most conflicted. In general, the entire 2nd tier represents the symbolic battle between the sun and the moon, respectively, the orb which represents the Brotherhood of Light and the orb representing the Lords of the Dark Face. By the time we reach the latter part of the 5th petal, the weight should be upon the side of the sun, and we should no longer be captivated by that which the moon represents. The fact that we see only one side of our moon perpetually and that there is a dark face or dark side of the moon is a fact which might be related to the nature of the Black Lodge. In any case, all intermediate processes, and this is the middle excuse me, the middle tier, are fraught with conflict. So within each individual, a similar conflict wages during this period, ending with the final Kurukshetra, or battleground, which earns for the man the right to tread the probationary path. And I'm just realizing, pardon me, I'm so sorry about this cough, just trying to forge ahead. This must occur in relation to petal 5, the early part of which can be very selfish, and the later part, placing the man upon the path of aspiration, which occurs just before the probationary path, path of probation. So, well, to call it the final Kurukshetra, maybe there are other Kurukshetras that lie on ahead. I mean, we're told just before the 3rd initiation there is a tremendous battle, a fearful conflict and so forth. But this Kurukshetra is about the decision of whether one will follow, at least try to follow the soul, or whether one will deliberately follow the personality. So this Kurukshetra is about whether one will attempt to follow the soul or higher power, or whether one will deliberately attempt to be a personality, using soul powers for personality purposes. So it seems to me that Petal 5, which talks about lives of conflict as we try to turn our attention to the real, is a good one for a process which determines whether we will follow the way of the solar angel, of the downward gazing soul, or whether we will, in a way, continue to emphasize our personality elemental, making it the solar factor rather than the soul as the solar factor. So, interestingly, a man enters the initial stages of the probationary path during the last stages of organizing and vitalizing Petal 5. The following quotation expresses the attitude of the probationer. And this is that important quotation. The petal of love for the astral plane, unfoldment, is brought about through the process of gradually transmuting the love of the subjective nature or the self within. In other words, we are a subtle self, a projection of the soul self, and we find ourselves within the personality elementals. This has a dual effect and works out onto the physical plane in many lives of turmoil, of endeavor, and of failure, as a man strives to turn his attention to the love of the real, or, we might say, or gives up and decides that the personality is real enough. Now, of course, we're told that even those who veer off onto the left-hand path may have taken the first initiation, even the second. But there must be something about them which maintains a very strong ahamkaric focus. And even though they are taking these initiations, something distinguishes them, I would say, from those who successfully pass on to higher realms, having taken these initiations, and go on the true Syrian path, which is the path for us of initiation. We note that many lives are involved in the unfoldment of the fifth petal. Well, the unfoldment of the earlier petals, huge numbers of lives are involved, but we just don't know what this many may mean, but it can tell us that in the attempt to transfer from the ordinary, selfish, and even dominantly selfish life to a life of aspiration towards a spiritual goal, many lives may elapse. So we may conclude that even during work upon the second tier, the path of probation may be entered. If the period of 7 incarnations of the 777 refer in any way to the path of probation, we will be forced to judge that these 7 symbolic incarnations occur while the second tier of petals are being organized, vitalized, and unfolded. Now, it just depends on how long we think the path of probation goes on, but certainly the beginning of it is beginning in work in the latter part of the fifth petal. So in this case, we will not be able to reserve the period of 7 incarnations for the organizing, vitalizing, and unfolding of the sacrifice tier petals alone. Some organizing and vitalizing may be done, even some unfolding, if the path of probation is thought to extend far enough, is thought to extend until the stage of accepted, let's see, ACDD, accepted disciple. But generally, the 7 incarnations still has to do with developments in the second of the tier petals. And eventually the privilege, let's see, let's go back. He earns the right to tread the path of tread the probationary path during this period, and eventually the privilege to stand before the portal of initiation. Now, this standing before the portal of initiation involves work, strenuous and abnormal efforts in the 7th petal, continued work in the 6th petal, and the unfoldment of the 5th petal. So, presumably, to stand before the portal of initiation is to be working upon the sacrifice tier petals, as during the initiatory process, the sacrifice petals unfold. So, may it not be that not only must the 70 incarnations be experienced, but the 7 incarnations as well, if a man is to stand before the portal of initiation. It depends on how we look at the path of probation. Does it extend beyond the 1st degree? Conventionally, it does not. And then we talk about real discipleship being a chela in little chela occurring at the 1st degree. So may it then be that the 7 incarnations have elapsed before the initiatory process begins, and I think that we can rightly say in most cases that this is the case. If we use that very special case where the path of probation must be taken all the way beyond the 1st degree until one becomes an accepted disciple, we leave no room for what is called discipleship, pledged disciple, between the path of probation and the path of accepted discipleship. And from different perspectives, both have been suggested. At the termination of the 777 incarnations, a man passes through the door of initiation and enters upon a brief synthesizing process or final period in which he garners the fruits of experience in the first 2 halls and transmutes knowledge into wisdom, transforms the shadow of things seen into the energy of that which is marvelous, and achieves the final liberation from all the lower forms which seek to hold him prisoner. Now, this is so good that, one wants to include it among the important, vital references. So at the termination of the 777, man passes through the door of initiation, and the synthesizing process, it's kind of interesting. The synthesizing process is suggested by what happens with the petals of synthesis. And I just want to say here, right here like this, that at each initiation, one of the petals of sacrifice, PTL, okay, well, I'll just do it petals of synthesis opens somewhat. So even at the first initiation, one of the petals of synthesis in the fourth tier is beginning to open. And this is the garnering of the fruits of experience in the first two halls. Transmuting knowledge into wisdom, it's part of the initiatory process and changes the shadow of things seen into the energy of being, which is realized at the third initiation, liberation, at the third initiation, and achieves final liberation from all the lower forms, and this at the fourth degree. So 777 does not really, under normal ways of interpretation, take us into the petals of sacrifice per se. Normally, the probationary path is considered to end with the first initiation, where we become the little chela, the true disciple, and then increasingly the pledged disciple. I would say an initiate of the first degree is, in a way, a pledged disciple. Maybe, well, certainly he's an accepting disciple, and even before the first degree, we can have the accepting probationary disciple. We can also, the series of acceptances simply increase. More and more must be accepted. So it applies, acceptance applies at several places on the path. Now here is an interesting idea. The period of between egoic cycles. Well, herein is hid the mystery of the 777 incarnations and concerns the relation of the unit to his group on the egoic plane prior to the unfoldment of the fifth petal. It concerns man in the period between the savage state and that of the disciple. Excuse me. When he is an average man, but still in the two halls. Now this is so good that it must be included with this group of vital references. And here, let's see, it must be included right here, because we talk about 5 petals on page 696 occurring at the first initiation, and here the 777 incarnations occur prior to the, I suppose, complete unfoldment of the fifth petal. I want to, yeah. Okay, so let's just say here that the complete unfoldment of the fifth petal concerns the first initiation. Well, it's a jigsaw puzzle, friends, and we have to put together all the little pieces. It's not the same as seeing things directly, but sometimes one can see directly and not understand what one sees unless one has done the preliminary work of understanding. So these two quotations above indicate that to be a disciple, to unfold the fifth petal and to take the first initiation are all equivalent. That's what a disciple is. That's so important. And here is a confirmation that to be a disciple is to have taken the first initiation. And this may usually be considered distinct from being a probationary disciple. To be a true disciple, one takes the first degree. All of these many, many distinctions, sometimes DK says, look, they're not real at all, and they're not all that important, but they are a scaffolding on which we can climb and elevate our consciousness. So these are very important references, and I've included them both in the vital references. I find that it is possible, even necessary, to have a special page of references one just cannot do without in order to orient oneself in this large collection of diverse references which have to somehow be fit together. And I think it's in our effort to fit these references together that pure reason or the intuition will develop. We have to really do the foundational, rigorous work of seeing how things relate, and then, lo and behold, the picture stands clear. Well, if you're working with me steadily in this kind of process that I'm offering, it is laborious, and it is preparation for the revelation of pure reason, where the before, the present, and the future are seen suddenly and at once intuitively in terms of their relationship. Of course, for the fifth petal to fully unfold, as we infer it does by the time of the first initiation, does not mean that the sixth petal is not quite fully unfolded, and that the seventh petal is not unfolding under the application of the rod of initiation, and hastened by the strenuous and abnormal efforts really, of the disciple. Well, when the fifth petal is fully, here's a question for us, when the fifth petal is fully unfolded, how much of the sixth petal must be unfolded? Now, it takes a long time excuse me, between the first and second initiation. So maybe, since it takes so long between the first initiation and the second initiation, that at the complete unfoldment of the fifth petal, not all that much of the sixth petal must be unfolded, and that over the intervening lives, of which there may be even 30, let us say, if we go with the allegory of the lives of Jesus, then more and more of the sixth petal will be unfolded, until at the second degree it is all unfolded. That is the hypothesis that I've been offering here, and many indications, I think, support it. So we note that the 7770 incarnations do not merely concern external affairs, but the relation of the unit to his group on the egoic plane. The ego does get involved on the path of probation. And perhaps on the egoic plane, the most significant developments, which we cannot yet see, are there to be seen. So on the path of probation, the ego is definitely involved as a what's called a downward gazing soul. So studying the numerical significance comes in here. They are hid in the number 10, or 3 cycles of 3 lesser periods, each making 9 and 1 synthesizing period, leading up to the consummation of 1 period within the greater cycle. Well, we've already looked at this idea. This is signaled by the 10 of relative perfection. One wonders what could be more perfect than the 10. Is it the 3? The 3 and therefore the 1? Or do we go in the other direction and call it the 12? I think not really. Although if the monad is essentially 12-fold, as I have received indications that it is, and maybe a 12, the number of Christ's ashram with him at the center, the number of the zodiac, is somehow still more perfect than the 10. But the zodiac of 10 is higher and greater than the zodiac of 12. So this cannot be established at the moment, at least by me. All right, so when it comes to the unfoldment of the Egoic Lotus, the 3 lesser periods though each indicated by number 30, are not actually in time and space of equal duration, and I think we have discussed that idea already. So here the number 10 is called the number of relative perfection, and elsewhere the number 7 is associated with relative perfection, and 10 is considered the number of perfection. And here's one example. Those with the totality of manifestation or the whole. These, with the totality of manifestation or the whole, produce the 10 of perfect manifestation of the perfect man. So that's definitely an indication of the perfection of the number 10. Here's another reference. A man contains within himself 3 major principles: will, love, and wisdom. Will, love, wisdom, and active intelligence or adaptability, and their differentiation into 7 principles, these making the eventual 10 of perfected manifestation. The solar plexus center and the heart, in which the 10 of the perfect man in this solar system is lost in the consummated 12. So the 10 rises into the 12. Solar plexus center and the heart. The heart is 12, the solar plexus is 10. The 5 centers with their 48 petals are synthesized, therefore, into the 2-petal lotus. We're speaking of the absence center. And then we have 48 plus 2 equals 50. The number of the perfected personality for 5 is the number of man, and 10 is that of perfection. So relative perfection or perfection. We see quite a few references that indicate perfection. And we have some footnotes here on all the different numbers. Matter of fact, kind of wonder whether these should be included. They are so important, they are so interesting, but are they actually related to the Egoic Lotus? That is our question. Well, it continues, because actually we are in a footnote at the moment, and we are working our way towards the study of the 7 incarnations, a much briefer period of time, and those which are passed upon the path of probation. It seems that it is not wise to continue this, as interesting as it is, in this particular program. So what I want to do then is say that this will be the end, okay, of Egoic Lotus webinar commentaries, program number 47, and that has taken us really only a few pages, maybe TCF pages 825, maybe to 827. And now we will proceed with the beginning of Egoic Lotus Webinar Commentary Program 48. Oops, I see what the problem is here. My abbreviations. No, I'll just say that way. And we will continue with TCF 827. These footnotes on the number 10 are very interesting, and I'll see whether I continue with them. The Egoic Lotus, we realize, is based upon the number 12. In that respect, I believe it is the reflection of the 12-fold monad. Now, the monad itself is a 12 and a 7, which is 19. And then we have to reach the number 22 in some way. And I think we can do that with the addition of a trinity. But these are on other matters. Well, what have we done so far? Because, obviously I'm halting before speaking of the number 10. We've begun to speak of it, but I think maybe in this case a 3-hour program is sufficient, especially with my voice in the condition that it has been. And I do apologize to you, and I'm sorry for the coughing and so forth. If I was to turn the program off with every cough, it would take 10 hours to do this. So my apologies to what this has meant to your ears and listening sensibilities, and I'm only hoping that it will be possible to use the voice a little bit more reliably before long. Well, we have been dealing with the first 2/3, should we say, in a way, of the 777 incarnations. And we have come to understand, maybe I think, what I'll do is I'll bring that out, that the 700 incarnations represent work within the hall of ignorance, which means work within these first 3 petals. That's the 700 incarnations, and by far the lengthiest process, involving even millions of years. All of us have passed through this period. I'm sure that one day, when we can remember all of the lives we have experienced on this planet and maybe on the moon chain, the length of time as appreciated from that perspective will seem astonishing. The 70 incarnations are associated with the second tier of petals and the development of increasingly personal love and cooperation in an intelligent manner in world affairs, but as I tried to explain, not the entire unfoldment of the second tier of petals, but more the work that takes us to the latter part of the 5th petal, and not so much the unfoldment of the 5th petal, maybe even the 4th, but the organizational and vitalization work that's done in those petals. By the time we reach the second part of the 5th petal, or maybe the latter part, we are really, I call it after the fall of the lower ego, and the realization that there's something far higher which deserves our aspiration. After that point, excuse me, we are really entering the 7 incarnations, the path of probation, which takes us through the organization of the latter part of the 5th petal. It takes us through quite a bit of organization and some degree of unfoldment of the 6th petal, as well as the continued unfoldment of the 5th petal, all the way to the point of the complete unfoldment of the 5th petal, where we have the disciple, the initiate of the 1st degree, and the entrance into the spiritual kingdom. And all 7 incarnations have elapsed before the complete unfoldment of the 5th petal and the application of the rod of initiation at the 7th petal. In any case, what we have done so far is to study the 777 incarnations. We have yet to study what DK tells us about the 7 incarnations of the probationary path, and we've seen somewhat how these symbolic incarnations correspond with the unfoldment of the Egoic Lotus. We're just at the seed of a tremendous science, a science which may not be with us for thousands of years in its entirety. I remember somewhere he talked about the reduction into textbook form of this treatise on cosmic fire occurring far, far ahead, even maybe around ahead at some point, maybe the latter part of the 5th round. So this is definitely pioneering work, trying to bring together many disparate aspects of information, bringing them together in a way which creates for us a whole picture. Again, friends, so sorry for the condition of my voice. I don't think it's ever been so bad while I've been trying to do these different kinds of commentaries, but I must forge ahead, and hopefully it will heal before long. So we will start with Egoic Lotus webinar commentary number 48, and we'll perhaps deal a bit with the number 10. Okay, we'll see you before long. Bye-bye.